Hello and welcome. I'm Stephanie with Monarch Productivity. Monarch Productivity works to increase your productivity so that you can do more good in the world. So today I want to start off with a little story. I've been spending a lot of time out in nature observing birds. I really like to just use that as a way to relax. And I find that when I'm observing birds and observing nature, I tend to just observe everything. And yesterday, when I was walking along a trail, I noticed a snail. And this snail was just very deliberately crossing a path. And it was maybe about 75% of the way along this path, and just going like snails do, incredibly slowly. And I can imagine that when the snail started working its way across the path, that the path must have seemed endless. It was probably 6 feet wide. And I can imagine that it was probably pretty intimidating to the snail, especially since it's a pretty frequently trafficked path, and it would be really easy for that little tiny snail to get stepped on. So he wanted to get across it probably as quickly as possible. And seeing that snail reminded me of today's topic, which is to set a really low bar. And you might think, oh my goodness, we just talked last week about setting a big three, and we've been talking about setting big goals, these big multi-generational goals. And so today we're talking about setting a low bar. Well, here's the thing. Those big multi-generational goals can seem incredibly intimidating. Indeed, they can seem paralyzing if you think about the end of the path. But if you just think about the beginning, like putting one foot in front of another to make progress along the trail, that makes the whole thing a lot more achievable. You may have heard the adage that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And so that's really what we're talking about here in setting a low bar, is thinking about that first step. So when we talked about the big three, your big three are the three things you want to do each day to move you towards your big goals. But while the overall goal is big, your big three should be small and achievable. In fact, they should be so small that you almost can't not do them. They should seem super achievable. Um, and when you do that, it makes it really much easier to get progress done. Now, some of you might think if I'm setting these little tiny goals, it's probably almost feels like it's not worth doing. And you can feel like you're not making very good progress if you're just making these little tiny steps. And if that's your mindset, then by all means set a stretch goal, right? Set your initial goal super small, very, very, very achievable. And if you get that done, set something that's a little bit more of a stretch. Maybe your goal for today is to find the email address of somebody you need to contact in order to do that next big thing. And if just finding the email address is your very small, achievable goal, actually writing and sending the email might be your stretch goal. So that's the way you might want to think about setting those stretch goals. Now, if you're curious about this idea of setting really small goals, I'd like to encourage you to turn to this week's resource, which is the book Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. Um, BJ Fogg just really does a great job of showing the value of those little tiny steps and how those little tiny steps can eventually achieve a big change. And if you're not a big reader, I'd encourage you to, or even if you are a big reader, I'd encourage you to watch his TED Talk, where in a very concise way, he really sets out this idea and how to utilize it. And so I'll put a link to the book and to his TED Talk in the show notes. So, this week, your challenge is to set a deliberately low bar, a deliberately low bar on your big three. And then at the end of the week, ask yourself whether you made better progress this week by setting low bars that you couldn't not make, right? Those little tiny goals that you couldn't not achieve, if you were able to achieve them more consistently than if you set larger goals that maybe were easier to get derailed. So I'd encourage you to do that, and then put your progress in in the show notes or in the comments below, and let us know how you did. And if you'd like some support in reaching that goal, now is the perfect time to join the Monarch. In the Monarch Productivity community, we go into a lot more depth on today's topic, and we learn from and support each other in accomplishing goals that help the world to be a better place. Now's the perfect time because the community reopens its doors on Tuesday, September 5th. Your first month is free, and that gives you plenty of time to tackle our new Goals for Good challenge, which is a course for Monarch Productivity community members that sets you up for success no matter where you are in your productivity journey. I hope you'll join us. The link to sign up is in the show notes. Thanks for joining us this week, and I'll see you next week.